All right, there we go. Okay, so welcome everyone. Here today with us, we have Robin from the Defiant, who is going to be presenting to us all about DeFi, everything he knows about DeFi, and giving us a bit of a tutorial of, kind of the various different types of protocols that are being used right now, and what you can do to basically put your your crypto to work in DeFi, and maybe give us a bit of a demo as well, so that we can see firsthand how this stuff works. So Robin, I'll hand it over to you. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Ricardo. Yes, I'm Robin Schmidt. As you can see in the background, I am something of a character in this space. My background is a strange one because I'm actually a filmmaker by profession. And I think filmmakers and creators in particular have a very dysfunctional relationship with money. And so you get to a certain period in your life where you think, I can only make one more film before I bankrupt myself. And so you naturally turn to this idea of, how do I solve money? How do I fundamentally solve that problem? And for me personally, the solution appeared to reside in crypto. And as I've gone through this journey since 2017, I sort of refined that idea down to this concept that I was trying to solve the problem of not having any money. Whereas in fact, what I believe crypto is trying to do is solve the problem of money itself. And in DeFi, decentralized finance, we're starting to see genuine innovation and genuine products and services that can actually do what I think is needed, which is to change the very fundamental shape and construct of money so that it's more favorable to people who actually need it. So there are opportunities for people to earn in different ways, to be self-sustaining, to be healthier in their relationship with money, i.e. not in debt or not indebted to a system that wants them to, spend a fortune on education just so they can not get a job. These kind of things. So there's a ton of good things that come out of decentralized finance. There's a ton of scams, hacks, money being lifted left, right, and center as well, which you need to be aware of. And it's important to remember that we're early. But because we're early, we're seeing this whole thing unfold and be built in front of us. And Ricardo wanted me to express why I was excited about DeFi. It's simple. It's because we get to make the rules. It's not because it's going to change the world, because it might not, but it's fundamentally, we have a chance to set the rules and set the guidelines by which generations beyond this and after that will judge themselves. And we can do it right now. We can do it through governance. We can do it through just standing up and having our voice heard. Or like I do, talking about it on YouTube. There's a genuine opportunity to participate in a way that has never been there before. And I think that is why, for me, it's the most exciting time to be, alive to the possibilities of this space. So that's me. I make regular videos for the YouTube channel for the Defiant. I tend to kind of spin them out in terms of more entertainment, because a lot of the stuff that I talk about is impossible to understand for most people. So I try and sugar the pill by making it fun and making it light, and hopefully people come back and watch again and again. They don't feel intimidated by it, they feel entertained by what we do. And then slowly over time, these sort of fundamental concepts start to leach in, and they can pick apart the difference between another loan or a compound loan and all these kind of things. So what I'm going to do today is try and do exactly that. It's to take you through some concepts. You may be familiar with them already, you may not. But my first impression for most people of what DeFi is, it's just like pretty much that. It's overwhelming, it's terrifying. It's a thing that you just go, it's not for me. But hopefully after this, you'll think it might be for me. And if I've accomplished that, then probably doing pretty well. So what I'm going to do now, share my screen, because I made like a whole presentation. So let's see if we can get this to work. And this is a presentation I actually did at Consensus this year for a series of sessions they're doing called Unlocked. This duck, by the way, kind of represents everything about DeFi. You're taking a bath. It's a Batman duck. He's cool. He's ready to go and do something. It's fun. That is the whole ethos of DeFi. It's fun, it's ludicrous, but it might kind of just, keep you afloat. It's wild. So what is decentralized finance? Well, It's a reimagining of the legacy financial system, and it's powered by smart contracts. And so everything you're accustomed to doing in traditional markets, lending, borrowing, money markets, derivatives, trading, all these kind of things, all possible in decentralized finance. It's just that instead of powering it through brokers and banks or insurance companies, it's done peer-to-peer, and it's governed by code. And you have all these different kind of pieces. And if you've ever encountered Ethereum, anything that's built on Ethereum can talk to anything else that's built on Ethereum. Now you try and do a transaction between two banks, they have to agree on how to do that. Now all of that stuff's getting easier in the modern world, but in DeFi, nobody needs anyone's permission to do it. And you don't have to ring up a bank and say, I'm going to send a thing through, you better accept it. It just happens because if you can see that someone has the funds, then you can allow the transaction to happen. That's a very, very simple way of talking about it, but essentially it's that. And then finally, decentralized finance, it makes money fun. And that is, I think, the reason a lot of people have stuck around in DeFi, even after things sort of crashed down. It's because it's fun. And money has never been fun for most people before. And it plays a big part in the whole kind of DeFi excitement. So, oh, there we go. So I did this presentation first, look, in May. And back in May, we were pretty much topping out where we were. And it was about $80 billion of value locked into DeFi. And when we say locked up, I'll kind of talk about what that means. But essentially, it's a commitment of funds from people towards protocols to supply liquidity, to allow their funds to be used in the service of a protocol. And $80 billion, well, that is a lot. If we look at the picture today, though, it's slightly different. And you can see that there's been something of a correction in the markets to the tune of almost 50%. This is what crypto does. It is terrifying and awful and makes you feel like your innards are being ripped out and fed to you. But you have to kind of ignore the peaks and the troughs and sort of look at the middle line. And to all intents and purposes, DeFi is doing extremely well. And the kind of broader picture is insane. From where we were even just a year ago to where we are now, it's just taken off. And there's lots of different reasons why that is, but fundamentally, crypto was always looking for its killer application. It was always looking for the thing that made sense in the real world. And there is a growing belief that decentralized finance is it. And you can see that reflected in how much money has been committed to it. So when we talk about decentralized finance, another interesting way of expressing it is open finance. So in an open finance system, it's permissionless, which means if I want to go and interact with a lending protocol, I don't need their permission to do it. And that's fairly profound, because normally, if I were to interact with a banking service or any other kind of financial service, I would have to give up some of my data. I'd have to do KYC. I would have to perform a certain number of registration tasks in order to do so. With DeFi, you don't. If you have an Ethereum wallet, you can interact with the Ethereum protocol. You just can. It's trustless, so you don't have to trust anybody. It's quite a difficult concept to get your head around, trustlessness, because that implies that there is no trust to be had. But in fact, what you're doing is you're saying trust is not required. Fundamental concept of blockchain, but it works the same way in decentralized finance. You simply allow the code to do its job. You allow the nodes to do their job to secure the network, and it just gets on with it. And of course, it's decentralized because that is the most important thing about blockchain is that there is no central point of failure. There is no way in which a network can be shut down. It's censorship resistant when decentralization is actually functioning properly. So that means that you can't have your money seized. You can't have your money denied you or locked up or frozen. We'll come back to that because in certain instances it's not entirely true, but that is the goal of the pure DeFi open finance system. So when you encounter DeFi, you're going to come across a lot of jargon or words that may seem a bit strange. Things like stablecoins or wrapping or AMM. We're going to cover some of these now and just go through them very briefly to kind of explain a little bit about what they are. So stablecoins, think of dollars. It's not actually a stable coin, but we think of it as a stable unit of currency by which we can kind of organize our financial thoughts during the week. We know how much things cost in terms of dollars. Trying to price things in Bitcoin, Ether, very, very difficult because it fluctuates so much. So one of the prime primitives in a DeFi system is a stablecoin. And these are often backed one-to-one by fiat currency. So Tether, for instance, or USDC, somebody deposits $1 into an account, a USDC is issued in response, and then that USDC, because it's a native cryptocurrency, can go and do all the kind of programmable things that we require cryptocurrencies to do that a traditional dollar cannot do. Not all stablecoins are pegged to fiat currency, though. For instance, MakerDAO issues the DAI. So you deposit Ether, and then the currency DAI is issued in return, and DAI is backed by Ether. And then there are algorithmic stablecoins, which are a whole other thing, which will blow the roofs of your heads off. So I will not go into them here. But suffice it to say that a lot of what happens in DeFi is experimentation. It's taking thought experiments about what is possible in economics and game theory, and then putting them into a production environment and seeing if they work. And most of them don't. But in those failures, we learn a huge amount. And so algorithmic stablecoins, you know, theoretically, they're incredible, but most of the time they fail. And that's primarily because people get scared and they run away, or black swan events happen. So very fascinating subject, but not for now. So Maker, as I talked about before, is the issues the stablecoin DAI. So anyone can mint DAI by looking up crypto as collateral. So you look up $200 worth of ETH and you can borrow $100 worth of DAI. And the way MakerDAO works is you have to over collateralize in order to take out a loan. So because Ether is so volatile, you can't very easily issue DAI based on a low collateralization rate, because the price fluctuates too much and everybody would be liquidated. But essentially what's happening with MakerDAO is a lot of people have a lot of ETH. A lot of the richest people in crypto have a lot of ETH, and they want to, you know, realize the value of that ETH to do something with, create a liquid asset out of it. For instance, they might want to go and deposit DAI or a stablecoin into, you know, a lending market to, you know, earn interest on it. They can't do that with ETH at the moment, but they don't want to sell their ETH, so they take out a loan on MakerDAO, and then they can start playing in DeFi, and they still have their ETH, and then they pay back the loan when they've hopefully made some profit on their stablecoins. So obviously, you can imagine that at a small scale, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but if you're talking about tens of millions of dollars, it can really add up. Wrapping. Wrapping is the idea of creating a tokenized version of one token on another network. The best example of this is Bitcoin. Bitcoin exists on its own network. It's a proof of stake coin. You can't really do a huge amount with it, although, you know, its prime function is a store of value. But if you wrap it as WBTC, you can send it on to Ethereum, where it can exist as an ERC20 token. And then that means it can be put to work much more easily in the same DeFi systems that work on every other asset in the Ethereum ecosystem. So it's, you basically send your Bitcoin to a smart contract. That smart contract locks it. It then issues an equal amount of the wrapped token on the other side. And then when you want to redeem that wrapped token for BTC back on the Bitcoin network, the WBTC that was issued on Ethereum is then burned. And that's how it works. So now I'm going to talk about automated market makers. So you might have heard of Uniswap. Uniswap is the most famous automated market maker at the moment. And all that really means is it's a way of allowing one person to trade with another person without then needing to be a centralized exchange with its liquidity pools. And so the prices between assets are derived algorithmically. There's oracles that search the markets for the best prices and listen, but fundamentally, the order book works between, works peer-to-peer, and liquidity is provided by normal human beings like you or me. So it's quite a lot to get your head around, but essentially it's just an algorithm defining the best price between two assets, based on supply and demand, and then liquidity being provided by it's crowdsourced liquidity, which is how people can actually make money in DeFi, by providing liquidity. It's a way of substituting what would be done by a centralized exchange with all the frailties and the custody required in that, and replacing it with just the liquidity that you might have in your own wallet that's sitting idle. You can put it to work. Oh, there we go, liquidity providers. So anybody can be a liquidity provider. When we talk about DeFi being permissionless, this is what I mean. So let's say I'm long ETH and it's just sitting in my wallet, and I'm thinking, well, you know what, there's more I can do with this. So in a traditional liquidity pool, what you do is you have, two sides of a pair. You have ETH on one side, say, DAI on the other side. If you want to provide liquidity, you have to provide an equal amount of ETH, equal amount of DAI. That goes into the liquidity pool, and in return, you get issued what's called an LP token. That LP token represents your share of the liquidity pool. And what's interesting about that LP token is that it can also be used to stake to earn more rewards. So for instance, if you are supplying liquidity on SushiSwap, for instance, they will issue an LP token. But because they want you to really stay and continue kind of being part of their ecosystem, they'll incentivize you to do so by allowing you to stake that LP token in another pool, which will then issue you rewards in the shape of their own token, Sushi. And it's because it's issued as a token that they can do that. If it was just, a receipt or a note to say, yeah, thank you very much, we've got your liquidity, this wouldn't be possible. But because these are all issued as tokens and represented as tokens, they can then be put into other things. And that's kind of one of the fun things about DeFi. Each little piece of it can be repurposed and put to work somewhere else. And I think what's interesting about this entire space is that it fundamentally feeds into mutual self-interest, which is a kind of interesting concept in blockchain anyway, that people can be persuaded to do the right thing if they're incentivized in the right way. And all that game theory that's wrapped up is played out in real time on these DeFi protocols, who are all looking to attract the most liquidity, because the bigger the liquidity pool, the bigger the orders that go through, the more money they make. So that game really is liquidity. And so that's where we get to this idea of liquidity mining. So Curve, the example I've got here, if you lock funds up in Curve, they will issue a token, CRV, which is their governance token. And the governance token has a value in of itself. So you're earning fees for supplying liquidity, but you're also earning a secondary token called Curve as well, which you can then sell. So you're making double profit. And this is essentially the basis of what we call yield farming. The first token that did this, and we'll look at it later when we do the demo, was Compound. So the Comp token, when it was issued, was a governance token. But people realized that if they were supplying liquidity to Compound, they were getting rewarded in this Comp token. And when it launched, it went ballistic. And people suddenly realized that these governance tokens, which no one had really thought would be anything, had real value, like genuine, honest to goodness value. And that Comp token kickstarted yield farming as we know it now. And then there was a whole insanity run last year with just innumerable protocols all issuing a governance token, and liquidity would move from one to the other, farm, supply as much liquidity as it could, get the early bird rewards, get those governance tokens, dump them, move on to the next one. And people became millionaires in a matter of weeks doing that. It's calmed down a little bit now, but essentially that is still happening. And I'm not going to go into the farming tab because that's essentially just a deeper dive into the same thing. But if you supply liquidity, you earn fees, but you can also earn these farming rewards as well. And if you sort of decide to dip a toe into farming, you will start to see things like this, and you will start to ask yourself, is this a joke? Is this a game? And yes and no. It does feel a little bit like going to the casino sometimes. You will see just the most obscene looking APYs on some of these farms, 5 figures. If we look at the example here on this pancake swap, you can see Some of these pools, you're getting 151% down the bottom. You've got PNT, PBTC with an APR of 303%. These are temporary percentages. They fluctuate a lot. And particularly when a pool is new, you will get just insane percentages as they're trying to attract more liquidity. Of course, it's not sustainable. And quite often that the liquidity will just be yanked because the people that are supplying it are big whales and they're just there for the first 48 hours and then they'll disappear. So farming is inherently a little bit risky, but people do go chasing after these huge numbers, and sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but it's a bit of a niche game and it's pretty much like gambling. Impermanent loss is a term you'll hear a lot. It's my belief that impermanent loss will probably be extinct within the next 2 years. But at the moment, what happens when you take a liquidity position is the prices between the two assets will be set in terms of a ratio. And if, for instance, you've got a pair which is quite volatile, I mean, for instance, ETH versus DAI, the DAI side is very consistent in terms of its dollar value, but the ETH side will go up and down. And if there's a big discrepancy between the two tokens, when you decide to withdraw your liquidity, because it only references the ratio that was set when you put the liquidity in, you can end up with a situation where you would have been better off just holding the asset rather than supplying liquidity, because the gains to be had from trading fees or from farming just aren't enough. So it's often worth just trying to calculate whether it's actually better to just hold an asset. So it's not always a win-win. So impermanent loss can be quite difficult to deal with. If ETH moons, you've got a problem. Composability, we kind of touched on before. So we've got this nice diagram here, which you can see RATS BTC, you can see USDC, Compound, Maker. All of these protocols can talk to each other and they can be built on top of each other. And what that means is that you can find all these weird and wonderful connections between all the protocols that allow some pretty sophisticated things to happen, which just wouldn't be possible in traditional banking system. So imagine you went to your bank and said, listen, I have an insurance policy with a completely different bank, but I would like to use that as collateral for a loan. Oh, by the way, since we're here, I also I have this mortgage with these guys over here. I'd like to wrap all that up and turn it into just some liquidity so I can go and buy a car. You'd be like, what? In DeFi, all of that is entirely possible. And we'll look at how you go about using that later on. But once you start understanding what composability is, it's pretty mind-blowing. And you might have heard this idea of money Legos, just putting different building blocks on top of each other. Pretty cool. One thing to bear in mind is that there is quite a lot of what we call smart contract risk inherent in that, because if you're plugging a smart contract that is not being thoroughly audited or has some vulnerable code in it into all of that stack, then it can infect the whole stack with a vulnerability that affects much more than just the local protocol itself. Layer 2 has been hot this year. Layer 2 it's a scaling solution for Ethereum. Now, Ethereum is quite an old piece of technology, and it was never really designed for the load that was very quickly built on top of it. And it often slows down, gets expensive. So layer 2 scaling solutions are designed to take some of the load away from the main chain, bundle transactions together, and then only commit them back to the main chain when required. So there's a few different layer 2s that are getting hot right now. One of them Optimism, one of them is Arbitrum, and then the one that probably most people have heard of, which is Polygon. But we're starting to see a system in which a lot of the friction that was inherent on working on Ethereum is starting to be taken away, and we can move value quite easily between chains, between layer 1s, but also onto layer 2s where other things can happen. And again, I think the game with all of this is going to be, where can my money be put to best use, and where are the incentives best to do so? And the less friction there is between moving things around, the easier it will be for us as consumers as savvy financial players to do so. Bridge. At the moment, we hear a lot about bridges. Bridges allow us to transmit value from one place to another safely, and allows interoperability to happen. I talked about what happens when you wrap Bitcoin, but there are bridges being built between all sorts of different chains. Binance Smart Chain has a lot of bridges. Polygon has a lot of bridges. And it's kind of useful to think of them like an airlock or a customs gate. Your token acts as a kind of passport that allows you to move onto the other chain and carry that value with you. But again, your assets are locked on one side and issued as a wrapped token on the other side, or as a native asset on, for instance, on Solana, you'll get the Solana version of USDC. But before long, we won't even think about bridges anymore. It's just this kind of weird technical moment right now where just even the idea of being able to bridge assets from one chain to another is fairly new. But before long, I guess all of that will be abstracted under the hood. We'll have nice, sexy UIs, and we won't even think about bridges anymore. So what can we do with DeFi? Well, we can lend, we can borrow. There's decentralized exchanges. And it's worth bearing in mind that, like, when the last bull run happened, everybody was trading on Bittrex, Binance, Huobi. The centralized exchanges were where the big things happened. And there was a big kind of incident, trying to remember the name of the exchange, but in South Africa, two brothers have just run off with billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. Centralized exchanges are extremely vulnerable. We shouldn't really trust them, but yet we do. With decentralized exchanges, we don't have to. But 4 years ago, they were just awful. We had Ether Delta, IDEX was a thing, but yeah, they were slow and clunky and didn't work. Now, they're absolutely fine. Still a little bit slow on Ethereum, but on other chains, incredibly fast. And the trading experience is no different to that of a centralized exchange. I just don't use them anymore, centralized exchanges. We can use DeFi for token governance. I was talking about how we can play a part in steering the future of these financial protocols. And it's quite common for people to find an idea or a community that they like and slowly bed in and become part of the furniture, and help steer decisions, create proposals to really experiment with stuff and take a part in guiding the future of these financial systems. We can also take out flash loans. The concept of a flash loan is a bit of a weird one, but essentially what it allows you to do, you can take out a loan of any amount really, and as long as you pay it back within the same block on Ethereum, you're totally fine. So you basically you can take out a loan, do something with it, and pay it back immediately, and that is something that you just can't do in TradFi. It's hard to understand why you would ever want to do that. If you're a hacker, it's a wonderful thing to be able to do, but I'll give you an example later on of why that might be useful. And then composability, this money Legos thing, allowing different blocks of financial products or different pieces of different protocols to work together is very cool. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about lending and borrowing. We just have money markets with interest rates. We'll look into those later on. We can use DeFi as a savings account. So I often use the example of Anchor. Anchor is built on Terra, and Terra is kind of one of the really first major DeFi focused layer one ecosystems. They have synthetic stocks on Mirror. They have Anchor, which is a savings protocol. What I love about Anchor is it's just super simple. You can earn money with a fixed rate of interest. In this example, it says 20%, but actually at the moment it's more like 17%. But that's still pretty good. That's a fixed rate of interest on just your savings, 17%. I mean, most people would take that, I think. And then you've got other tranche products for savings. There's zero coupon bonds available, all sorts of interesting things. Decentralized exchanges. Yeah, the decentralized exchange volume at the moment is not quite as high as this, but this is serious. And it's only going to increase as well. There's a lot of volume going through decentralized exchanges. We have the token governance, flash loans, there is an insane example of a flash loan that was enabling a hack. I'll give you guys this presentation because that is something to look at. Every single piece of this this transaction all happened instantaneously. There's about 10 different steps here, and what's represented there is a hack. So someone's stealing some money and getting away with it. Absolutely incredible. One of the interesting things about flash loans is they allow you to perform arbitrage between different decentralized exchanges. And because decentralized exchanges use slightly wonky price oracles, it's quite common for the price between decentralized exchanges to be off. So a flash loan allows you to take out a loan in one place, exploit the difference between prices on decentralized exchanges, and then pay the loan back with the profit in your pocket. But it basically, you know, if you've got a big brain and you understand code, there's all sorts of shenanigans you can perform under the hood, and people do. We're going to look at some composability later on, so I won't go into that now. But one of the kind of core use cases for things like this is refinancing loans. So let's say I take out a loan on Compound, and the next day I see that the interest rate on Aava is much more favorable. To unwind my position on Compound, actually quite a few steps, and using financial Legos, money Legos like this, and using flash loans, I can actually unwind that position, move it to Aava, and take out the new loan, all in a very, very short space of time, and all using minimal gas by using money Legos. So that's why flash loans are good, because they allow you to do all these steps very, 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 very quickly, and that just wouldn't be possible any other way. Yes, here's another sophisticated hack, and here's me singing that hack as a slow jam. This is the kind of stuff that I do. I just thought this hack was so insanely beautiful and artistic that I decided to turn it into a slow jam. And you can find that on our YouTube channel. But oh my goodness, I've forgotten just how insane this one was. There's about 12 different steps here, and this all happened in a single transaction. Probably means nothing to you, but it shows you just what kind of big brain stuff is going on with money Legos. Here's an example of refinancing a loan. I'm not going to go through that because now we're going to head on over to DeFiSaver.com. Ricardo, is this a good moment to take some questions? Because I feel like I've been going extremely fast.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. If you have any questions, why don't you you can either unmute or raise your hand. You can go ahead and ask your question here.
I can see what's happened here. Everyone's just like,
there we go. Here, I see a question in the chat. Let's see. So, okay, so it says L2 scaling solutions. I understand the promises of L2, but I've been hearing that they are hard to get set up / kneecap the composability. Can you explain more why that is the case? Good question.
Yeah, so we're at the kind of teething stages of what is going to end up being a highly interoperable network of blockchains. It's interesting if you look at the Polkadot ecosystem, for instance, because it's designed to be entirely interoperable. And so you have chains that are designed to work with each other. They all anchor themselves to the security of the Polkadot main chain, but they can all have their own governance and they can strip out the code that they don't need. Layer 2s in comparison are pretty clumsy. The thing is, everyone was a bit shy about jumping onto layer 2s because they thought it was just too much effort to move across there. But since Polygon launched and since Binance Smart Chain launched, I think what people have realized, and particularly people who were, let's say, possessed of a slightly smaller stack of cash to play around with, realized that if they moved over to these layer 2s, the benefits of doing so in terms of just massively reduced gas fees, a different kind of set of games to play, where they felt priced out of the market on Ethereum because it had gotten really expensive, then the benefits of doing so were worth it. And so when you say hard to get set up, it's not. Like Polygon, for instance, is EVM compatible. It's basically using the same kind of smart contracts as Ethereum. From a developer's point of view, there are huge benefits to being there. Yes, it is a little bit of work, but I know, for instance, I talked to the team at Avagotchi. They were on Ethereum, and it was just impossible for them to run their game on Ethereum. They moved over to Matic, and then that became Polygon, and they've never looked back because everything was just much faster. People were playing every day, and it was just a lot easier. In terms of composability, yeah, it is true. If you think of Layer 2 as a separate country within Europe, so if I'm in the Netherlands and I travel to France, it is like moving to a separate country, because it is. You can freely travel there, but things are going to be a bit different. That does affect composability, but it's not necessarily a kneecap, because if you look at what's been built on Polygon, you've pretty much got everything you need. And I'm looking to the likes of Solana, to Terra, to Karura on Kusama, which is a phenomenal set of chains, to build out these highly interoperable DeFi environments. We know DeFi is hot. Solana have raised 380 million. Near Protocol as well is raising a huge amount of money to create a DeFi ecosystem. I think if what's there makes sense for you, people will go there. For a long time, it didn't look like people would go to where the environment was favorable, but they are, and it's actually happening. And like I said, I'm excited for Terra. I'm excited for Karura as well. There's some cool stuff going on. So I think it's not really an issue. What are my thoughts on projects trying to bring smart contracts to the Bitcoin blockchain? Yeah, good luck to them. I don't know how you do it, and I don't know if it's necessary. That's the thing. If you can easily wrap Bitcoin and move it to an environment where smart contracts are already in place and it's easy to do so, then there's really no need for Bitcoin to support that. Bitcoin can retain its cachet as a store of value, as a hedge against inflation, all of these narratives that sit there. It's probably not necessary for Bitcoin to have it. And you wonder whether it introduces bloat to the Bitcoin network that it doesn't need, because I don't know if you ever tried to transfer anything on Bitcoin. It's a nightmare. So whatever slims Bitcoin down and makes it easier is probably better for everyone. 17% API. It's not API, it's APY. There's the difference in the two different, but the yield from Terra, coming from a traditional background, yes, of course it seems magical. There is so much going on in the background on Terra that it'd be an hour just to explain how all the different pieces of it work. But fundamentally, because Terra is not just one app, it is a bunch of different applications which are earning money. So for instance, they have a Chai payment app, which is operational in Korea. They have 46,000, I believe, 46,000 daily active users. This thing generates revenue. The people who use it have no idea they're using the blockchain, but it's built on UST, which is their own native stablecoin. That UST is put to work in a number of different ways across a number of different protocols. It earns fees for people using TerraSwap, which is their decentralized exchange. There's the Mirror protocol, which is synthetic stonks. All of these things are generating revenue. That revenue goes into a pool, a reserve pool. That reserve pool is then topped up, and people are paid their that interest out of that pool. But you have to remember that this is lending. On the other side, you have borrowing. So the people who are borrowing are paying interest to borrow. Weirdly, on that borrow side, there's also another token, which is ANC, which is the governance token of Anchor Protocol. And if you look at the borrow side of the Anchor money market, it's way more profitable to borrow than it is to lend on Anchor, because borrowers are being highly incentivized to take out loans. And so the interest on those loans is what's then going into paying everyone else off. There's a bunch more stuff going on, which is to do with what's happening with the Terra token itself and with Luna. It's very complicated, and I think I would make a mistake if I tried to explain it. But yes, I understand. why you would think it seems magical. I mean, there's other amazingly magical stuff like Alchemix, for instance. Alchemix is a borrowing protocol, which is a loan that pays itself back. Figure that one out. You can't be liquidated. The loan just pays itself back. So what happens is you deposit DAI into the protocol. That DAI is then deposited into a Yearn vault. Yearn is, it's kind of like a money manager for DeFi. They invest, but they put your money to work in different kind of vaults. Those vaults earn yield. And what they're doing is they're optimizing strategies for Curve, for Compound, wherever there's good money to be made, that's where they're deploying capital. And you just deposit your money into the vaults and then earn interest. So what Alchemix do is they deposit your DAI into that vault. And then what you are issued is money that represents the future yield that you will have earned over the course of a 2-year period, but you get it now. So your only debt is time. Isn't that wild? Now you can't take out the entire amount that you put in. You can only take out 50% of it. So it's, the collateralization rate is 150%, but it does mean, let's say, for instance, you're like me and you want to fund a film. You have a budget of $1 million for your film. You raise $2 million, you put that $2 million into Alchemix and take $1 million out. You make your film. Great. But what happens then? Okay, so a film usually takes about 2 years to make. At the end of the 2 years, I get my money back. But I can also make money on my film. But if my film makes no money, I don't care, because I can just make another film. That's why I get excited about DeFi, because I can see things like that are possible. Now, I'm not saying it's not without risk, because it is. But if we can start to kind of figure out what those risks are and mitigate them, and we might do that through insurance, we might do that through sort of hedging mechanisms. But for me, as someone who's always had that issue with money, how do I fund things? How do I get, these wild ideas that I have that don't make any sense to anybody but me? How do I get them made in a way that for an investor represents basically a net zero risk? Well, this is how you do it. So that's a cool one. What are my thoughts on the future of VeChain? VeChain fam in the house. Wow. No comment. It's not, they don't do DeFi, so I can't talk about that. I follow VeChain for many a year, but I won't talk about them here. Sorry. So the yield is coming from real activity on the protocol. Yes and no. There is a lot of money being created out of thin air, or sorry, a lot of value being created out of thin air through incentive mechanisms. And protocols can issue tokens. They have mechanisms for issuing tokens. Those tokens have perceived value, which can evaporate at a moment's notice. But if there's perceived value, you can usually find someone to take the other side of a trade, and then you realize that value. Yeah, it's a strange one. One Iron stablecoin was equal to 1 USDC. Now it's only worth 0.75 USDC. Who got the 0.25 USDC at the end? Well, we're talking about the Iron stablecoin. I actually made a film about this because Mark Cuban got burned. He got his ass handed to him in a big way. So basically, Iron was another algorithmic stablecoin. They had a 75 to 25% collateralization ratio. So 75% of Iron was collateralized by USDC, and then 25% of it was collateralized by their own token, Iron. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that that was never going to work. So whales were piling into the liquidity pool, and this thing was just going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And then the moment things got bad and they started to pull their collateral out, the whole thing collapsed. And the reasons behind that are very straightforward. They just didn't plan for it. It's as simple as that. And that's why when these things happen, you do, a good post-mortem on it, and we just go, let's never do that again. And then 2 weeks later, everybody does. Most loans are over collateralized. So if you put in $100 collateral, you can only borrow, say, up to 80% of that. Yeah, 80%. If you've got 80% on a collateralized loan, you're doing pretty well. There are protocols like Liquidity where you can get the collateralization ratio down to 110%. But if you do that, you are taking on an enormous risk. There are so many different flavors of lending coming out. I mean, I gave the example of Alchemix. It's not the only one. There is an Alchemix-like protocol coming to Terra. And because Terra has a much more sort of expanded and robust internal ecosystem, it might be more, it might be safer than Archimix, I don't know. But yeah, traditionally, I mean, for the most part, 150% collateralization ratio is what happens. But I mean, basically, we are moving from, well, I think it's going to happen pretty quickly, but we're moving from over collateralization to probably what will be some form of credit-based lending. I don't exactly know how that's going to work, but there will be mechanisms for you to prove credit worthiness on the blockchain sooner rather than later. And when that happens, over collateralization will simply go away because it's just horribly capital inefficient. What we do see though is the ability to take out a loan and create a liquid derivative of that loan that you can then unwind and split up the yield. I mean, I spend every day reading Medium posts and documentation, and my tiny little brain can't hack it sometimes. But trust me when I say that there is more innovation happening in the lending and in efficiency of lending space than could fill, you know, a book that big. It's pretty insane. Multi-step transactions using how do they actually implement this? Did they deploy a Solidity smart contract, codify the steps, and call it on the mainnet? Yes, effectively, yeah. I mean, when we look at Uniswap, for instance, you're seeing a front end that's designed to make it easy for you to interact with the blockchain, but all of it's just code. So if you understand the code and you understand how to write the code, you can look inside the smart contract and you can see that perhaps there's a function in there that was left behind from whatever smart contract was originally the template for it. That's a vulnerability, and then you can start to mess with it. You can trick a smart contract into doing something it's not supposed to do if they're, you know, if it's just logic, right? So if you say I need to go outside, so I need to open the door, but you forget to tick the box that says make sure the dog is inside, then the dog can get out. That's it. It's just really as simple as that. So effectively, that's what hackers are doing. They're making sure that the dog gets out. But yes, it's just code. Has there been any discussion about whether wrapping is a taxable event? Yes, there has been. Depends where you live. If you live in the US, everything is a taxable event. So good luck. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I couldn't give you the solid and truthful answer on that. I know that, you know, there's a great deal of clarity required on what constitutes a taxable event. And good luck to you if you are, you know, exchanging on decentralized exchanges where they won't even give you a printout of what you've done. I don't know. I hope it gets clarified sooner rather than later and there's some common sense, but at the moment, I don't know. That is the questions. They were good questions. Thank you. Should we look at a demo? Should we do some DeFi? Let's do that. So what we're going to do now is going to go and look at a site called DeFi Saver. Let's open up DeFi Saver. So this is DeFi Saver, and it is it's like a DeFi dashboard. And the reason I like DeFi Saver is that it just kind of unifies all these different protocols under one kind of quite professional looking and sleek looking dashboard. So on the left here, you can see MakerDAO, Compound, Other, Reflexer, Liquidity. We can exchange, we can do loan shifting, and we have a recipe creator. That's where we're going to make some Legos. What I particularly like about DeFi Saver is that we just go down here, there's a simulation button. We switch that on, and we can now create a new simulation account. And you get a nice surprise when you open that simulation account. I'm also going to open up a smart wallet because it'll allow me to do some good things here. And so this will just bring up a box here, which is going to ask me to pay for this. So what we look at here, in order to create a smart wallet, I'm going to have to pay around 50 bucks. Welcome to the expensive world of DeFi on Ethereum. So everything we're going to do now is basically a simulation of what it would be like to work on Ethereum, and you will see it's expensive, But the reason we don't care, if I accept this now, that completes really nice and fast. The reason we don't care is because under the simulation, we get 100 ETH. So we get 100 ETH to play with. And that's actually a pretty good amount to start playing with, because on Ethereum, these things, unless you're working at scale, the gas fees will just eat up all your profits. So we're starting with like 200 grand here. Funny enough, the last time I did this demo, it was 250 grand, but still 200 grand, we'll take it. So what we're going to do now is just take a look at the different things that we can do in DeFi. And primarily that's going to be borrowing, lending, and savings. So here's MakerDAO. Now this is not the MakerDAO UI. This is DeFi Saver's version of it. But all it's doing is it's just providing a user experience for the protocol's backend, which is doing all the work. So we can now create a collateralized debt position. And the CDP is basically how you take out a loan on MakerDAO. So here's how it works. Now you don't need to worry about ETH A, ETH B, ETH C, all of these kind of things. We're just going to worry about ETH A for the moment. So in order to take out the loan, we need to put some collateral in. So that's going to be our input. I'm going to put 10 ETH in, and in return, I will get 8,051 DAI. So now I can look at over this side here. My collateralization ratio is 250%. So that's quite a lot. Liquidation ratio is 150%, and the stability fee is 3.5%. Stability fee is there basically to ensure that if a black swan event happens, the protocol can cope with it. And there was a famous instance called Black Thursday, was it Black Monday? That happened on MakerDAO, where it lost its peg, the whole thing, it created a kind of a huge ripple effect through the rest of DeFi, and things got really bad and people got liquidated when they shouldn't have done. And it was a bad moment for MakerDAO, but they recovered from that. And now we have things like the stability fee, the liquidation ratio. This is the minimum collateralization ratio. So if we drop below that, it will mean that our loan is liquidated to cover the obligations of the loan. So if we look now, we can see that our collateralization ratio at the moment is 250%. So we're in good shape. So we're going to create that, accept it. So look, we're now about to spend $42. So in the space of 2 minutes, we'll have spent $100 just to do a couple of just basic things. This is why we do the simulation. I'm not going to do that now. So if we go back to the dashboard, we can now see what has happened. We have a DAI balance of 8,051 DAI. You can think of DAI as dollars, same thing. And then in our vault, we have 10 ETH locked up, and that has issued us a debt of 8,051 DAI. The question is, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to take out a loan? Because taking out loans feels like you're indebting yourself. Well, the honest truth is, there are other things you can do with your DAI. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to DeFi Rate. DeFi Rate is it's a place to explore what lending rates are for particular protocols. And you can compare, for instance, DAI, you've got USDC rates here, and you can see what you could do with your DAI. So for instance, if I look here, I can see that on Celsius, I get a 4.6%. DidX, so I get a 1.17. Coinbase is giving me 2. But up here, I've got Nexo is offering 10% on DAI. So I'm thinking, okay, well, my ETH is sitting in a vault. It's still my ETH. I now have this DAI, and this DAI can start earning me money. And I could take that interest, and that's good, then would be my profit. I pay my loan back, and there you go. So it's basically a way of freeing up capital from an asset that you wouldn't want to sell otherwise, and then allowing you to do more with it. And as you get more confident in using DeFi protocols, you'll start to kind of use more complex strategies and think about different ways to deploy your capital in the most efficient way and the most profitable way. But it's a slow game that takes a bit of time to learn. So now we can look at compounds. Compounds are an interesting one because, as we talked about earlier, it has this token comp. And you can see up here, there's a comp option. So what we're going to do now is we're going to supply some ETH to, I'll tell you what, why don't we supply the DAI that we just took out to Compound? That's a good idea. So we took out a loan on ETH from Maker, got some DAI, and I'm going to supply all of that to Compound. And why Compound? That's a relatively cheap transaction, $4.48, not bad. And now I had to set up a DS proxy. You don't need to know what that is. Basically, in order to interact with Compound, sometimes you have to deposit into a type of wallet that is better equipped to engage with the rest of the protocol because it's just more efficient. That's what we're doing here. But effectively, it's the same as depositing. So now we deposited the 8,051 DAI we took out as a loan into Compound. And why would we do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because that will earn us not only interest, but also the comp token. So once again, if I go back to the Compound tab, comp only gets paid out every 24 hours. So we won't see any yet, but if I were to click on this, I will be able to see how much comp I could take out. Now, if you look, the comp price is $257 right now. I'm not sure exactly how much you would get, but it's quite a lot. And it's a pretty worthwhile reward to have. So if you're kind of working towards a DeFi strategy with a decent amount of capital and you want to go towards, what is considered a blue chip DeFi protocol like Compound and other, that comp token can be a real earner for you. And it's a very desirable one to have. And it's impressive that it's held its value as well as it has, but yeah, it's a really strong protocol. So now I'm going to go down and do something else. So I have noticed here that there's a smart savings tab. So I'm curious what I can do in the smart savings tab. Okay. Interesting. What can I do here? So I'm thinking that I might like to take advantage of this 2.28% on Ava. Okay. So what I can do is, I think I have to deposit DAI. Okay, so I need to get some more DAI, but instead of taking out a loan this time, I'm just going to do a straight up exchange. So I go down to the exchange tab, and I'm going to exchange directly from DAI, from ETH to DAI. So now you'll notice I can get a lot more DAI, and that's because I'm not taking out a loan, but I am selling my ETH. So I no longer own that ETH, and I can exchange that now. That's going to cost me 20 bucks. You can see how the fees add up, right? I can continue now. And then if I go back to the savings tab and go to the supply here, I want to supply to other. And I'm going to supply 10,000 DAI to other. Accept that, 27 bucks. I don't know if anyone's keeping score, but we've certainly racked it up. And now you'll see that I have $10,000 deposited in other. Sorry, 10,000 DAI. I've got 8,051 DAI deposited in Compound. And then I would like to draw your attention to this little thing here. This is how much money you're earning in real time. Isn't that pretty? It's just going up, going up, going up. And that's how DeFi works. It just happens like that in real time. So that's a very kind of quick look at how you might move money around and how you might take advantage of different protocols. I often look at DeFi rate for the best interest rates. There are other resources that you can use. The DeFi tab on CoinGecko is pretty useful. Another site I use often is DeFi Pulse. You'll probably recognize the charts I used here. This gives you a pretty good overview of what's going on, what value is locked up in these different protocols. And it's probably useful to think of TVL or total value locked as a kind of a marker of confidence in a protocol. the more value that's locked up in there, the more confidence there is. But you know, there was $2 billion locked up in the Titan Iron Finance protocol, and that just that wasn't secure at all. So it's not necessarily the best marker, but you know, in terms of these top kind of 10 protocols, you can be pretty sure, since they've been around so long, that they're in pretty good shape. The last thing we're going to do is look at this tab here, which is the recipe creator, because this is fun. So in here, we can look at a bunch of recipes, and those recipes are effectively just collections of money Legos stacked together to allow you to do, you know, normal operations that you might decide to do. So for instance, we can supply DAI from maker to compound. So that's basically what we did before, but we did it in a few different steps. If I now click on this, you can see the different steps, the different Legos that will be in operation here. So the first one, we would create a new vault on maker. We would then wrap ETH. So the funny thing about the ETH token is it's not an ERC20 token. It's its own token. Every other token on Ethereum is an ERC20 token and can therefore interact with smart contracts in the same way. In order for ETH to act in the same way, you have to wrap it. So that's what's going on there. So we can then supply collateral to the vault, we can generate DAI from the vault, and then that collateral can be supplied to Compound. And if you remember, those are all the steps that we did, but this recipe is going to do them all in one go, which is kind of fun. So we can go ahead and edit in the creator. And you can see now that we have these Legos. And down here, we've got other Legos. So we can actually add more on. So we could add another Lego here. This wouldn't make any sense at all. But we can, and we can also delete them. And we could also move them around. It's like building a website in WordPress. It's crazy. So if I click on this now, I can choose the amount I want to wrap. So for instance, 10 ETH. And then this is going to ripple through and say, no, I'm supplying 10 ETH to that vault. If I want to generate, well, how much do I want to generate? 5,000 DAI. Maybe I want more than that. No, that's fine. And then I can supply that 5,000 DAI to Compound. And then I'm done there. And that is it. And now I can click on execute. That's a $74 transaction. Goodness me. And it's done it. It was as simple as that. Now, if you were doing this on the Ethereum mainnet, it would nowhere near be as quick as that. But the cost is probably about right. But to do all those different steps, one after the other, individually, you would rack up so much more in fees, and it would, you know, you'd have to do each step individually. So that is the end of the demo. I hope that kind of gives you an insight into what money Legos are like. There's so much more you can do with them, and you can mix and match. What I love about DeFi servers, you can actually write in what you want to do in natural language. You can just say, right, I want to swap this token for this token, and then supply it here, and it will just fill in the Legos for you. It's a great little platform. And because you get 100 ETH to play with in simulation mode, it's worth just trying stuff out. See what works, get to know it. Don't be afraid of it. Because I think the main lesson I've learned from all of this is that the big game is liquidity. Everybody wants your money and they're prepared to pay for it. So if you think about your money as a weapon, you can go and do a lot of damage all over the place that's, you know, going to accrue back to you. And it's up to you to decide where you want to do that and how you want to do that. But if you compare it to like the measly, whatever it is, 0.03% that your standard savings account is going to earn you in a bank, you know, why not? Why not at least investigate it in simulation mode, because you can't lose anything. So there you go. We have a question here. Do you think that the transaction costs, which have been very high on the DeFi Saver demo, will continue to drop significantly with Solana's capability of layer 2? Okay, so layer 2, not all layer 2s are created equal. So for instance, if you transact on Loopring, which is a ZK Snark rollup, ZK rollup, it's really cheap. Polygon is pretty cheap, if I'm honest. Algorand, not so cheap, but very, very fast. Solana, it's pretty cheap. Binance Smart Chain, pretty cheap. Like once you start operating with fast transactions, cheap transactions, suddenly all of those barriers, like, oh gosh, how much? Like $200 to unwind a yearn vault? No, it makes no sense. But once you start working on those cheaper chains, it's pretty addictive. I think the Terra, it's like 24 cents, I think, for a Terra transaction. So it's not the cheapest, but it's certainly not expensive. And then I don't know what the costs are going to be on Kusama, but they won't be high, not at all. Any other questions? How do you pick yield farming? Very carefully is the answer to that. Listen, it's not that difficult. If you see a farm with an APY of 10,000%, you can be damn sure that it's not going to be 10,000% for very long. And you can take that risk, but just be aware that that is what you're farming there is a token whose value might just plummet overnight, and there's nothing you could have done about it. So you have to get a lot of caffeine, a lot of Red Bull, and watch what's going on. And the moment things start to go bad, get out. There's no need to get caught in a rug pull. So I would say, if you're starting out, pick something that has like a reasonable return. And like I can't say enough about compounds. Like farming compound as your first kind of as your first foray into DeFi and farming. I don't think you can go wrong with that one. And then you can branch out into other things on BSC or on Solana. I've got farm suggestions for Solana. I don't know. Look at Radium. I'm not going to give out financial advice, and I won't recommend things on. So I couldn't tell you, but I would stay away from 5-figure APYs if I were you. I had the best way to do yield farming is to create your own farm. Sure. Good luck. No comment. No comment.
Great. Well, listen, Robin, that was awesome. Really appreciate you kind of taking the time. The presentation was awesome. I know that I learned a ton, and everybody else seemingly did. Some great questions. Thanks for taking those, and hopefully we'll get some good comments on when we post it on YouTube. But nonetheless, appreciate it, man.
Nice one. My pleasure. Stay safe, everyone, and good luck.
Alrighty.
Cheers then.
Thanks,
Bye.
Robin.